On October the 3rd, 1978, near Sayama City in Saitama, Japan, Hideichi Amano, 29, and his 2-year-old daughter, Juri, had driven his car to the top of a mountain near Sayama City so that he could get unobstructed transmission and reception of radio waves to enable him to communicate with his younger brother, who lived far away in Yamanashi, Japan. Amano was an amateur radio operator who ran a snack bar called Juri, named after his daughter. Amano and his brother started talking at about 8:50 p.m, and after they'd finished, he chatted with a few of his local ham radio friends before deciding to call it a night and go back down the mountain. At that moment, the interior of the car became very bright, and when he turned his head to check that his daughter was okay in the back seat, an intense bright light shone inside his car. The light was stronger than any fluorescent light he'd seen. As he stuck his head out of the side window to try to locate the source of the light, he was shocked to find that the ultra-bright light was restricted only to the interior of the car. When he again turned to check on his daughter, he now found her lying on the seat, foaming at the mouth, and at that very moment, a strange round orange-coloured light was illuminating over his stomach. He then looked to see where the beam of light was coming from, and found that it was coming from the night sky. Then no sooner had he looked at the source of the light, he felt a metallic object being pressed against his right temple. As the pressure began to increase, and in a state of abject fear, he looked at the side and saw a weird, unearthly creature standing there. He could see a pipe-like device protruding from its mouth, and it was that object that was pressing against his head. It appeared to be sending a message to his brain by way of voiceless, high-pitched noises which sounded like a tape cassette playing at high speed. The strange alien's face was round and it had no neck. There was a depression on its forehead in the shape of a triangle, and the being's ears were large and pointed on the upper edges. It had 2 very small eyes that did not move, but glowed like bluish-white miniature lamps. Its mouth appeared to project into a pipe which was pressed against his temple, but it was obscured as he attempted to look sideways. He could see no sign of a nose on its face. Terrified, Hideichi Amano tried to flee, but when he went to start the car, the engine would not start, and the headlights were not working either. As all of this was happening, the strange messages continued to flow into his brain, and he was still immobilized, and his brain was slowly becoming vague. After about 5 minutes, he noticed that the being began to slowly disappear before completely vanishing, and the round orange light on his stomach disappeared while the interior light in the car returned to normal brightness. Suddenly, everything in the car began to work, where the headlights came on and the car radio started playing. Later, when he checked his watch, he found that it had stopped working at 9:57 p.m. With things back to normal from his frightening ordeal, and when he turned on the ignition, the car immediately started and he was able to drive back down the mountain. A short time later, when he had come to his senses as to what he had just experienced, he found that he was so eager to drive away from the scene that he had not turned to check on the condition of his daughter. When he had reached the place of safety, he turned around and his daughter stood up and said, "I want a drink of water, Papa." As he was driving home, he wondered whether he should report his experience to the police, and eventually decided to do so. But just as he feared, they did not believe his story and made fun of him. As he arrived home and handed his now sleeping daughter to his wife, who was still working, he went to bed complaining of a severe headache. Television researchers heard about his story and asked his permission for him to be put into the hands of a professional hypnotist called Mr. Akio Moriya. They wanted to check on the validity of his story, and being hypnotized might help him recall what had happened to him. His first regression was videotaped and shown on TV, where they were able to retrieve what had happened. He was able to recall being asked by the alien to return to the same spot on the mountaintop so that they could meet again. The date of their return meeting was omitted from the TV show. The show had attracted many viewers who later flocked to the mountain in the hope of seeing him meet with the being, and were told that if a meeting proved to be successful, it would be shown on TV. But this could prove difficult if they had no exact time or place. At the end of the first hypnotic session, an important fact came to light, where Mr. Amano said a word that was interpreted as rosary. The experimenters inferred that although he had not consciously remembered it, he had been given a glass rosary by the humanoid being, so that when the day of the meeting came, the being would return in front of the witnesses when he supposedly rang the rosary. But was the rosary somehow misinterpreted as being something else altogether different, because at the end of the session, and although he had not remembered what it said during his regression, he said that he had seen a bracelet and not a rosary during the half-conscious period at the end of the hypnotic regression. So they now assumed that he may have been given some kind of crystalline bracelet that was hidden somewhere about him, which he had not remembered. When he eventually remembered, he would ring it and the being would return and hopefully reveal further information to him. However, was all this mere conjecture on behalf of the TV crew? Nonetheless, the TV crew would hide near the spot to hopefully record the encounter on video to show the viewers, but it appears it was to no avail. After the television show, they went to Mr. Amano's house, and together with a man by the name of Jun-Ik Takanashi, they were able to sketch an image of the head of the alien by Mr. Amano. The encounter is seen as perhaps the strangest ever to have taken place in Japan. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to hit like. It really helps to keep the channel growing. And if you're new here, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest videos. We've got lots of strange and fascinating stories coming up, and we'd love to have you along for the journey. And now we have a bonus story for you. Call from the future. In late 1974, a man by the name of Dr. Joseph Subrink began receiving unexpected telephone calls from a male voice. At first, the calls seemed merely odd, where the voice was calm, articulate, and emotionless. It did not ask personal questions, and it did not threaten or harass. But very quickly, the content became disturbing. The caller claimed to be communicating from the future, and identified himself as someone who'd once lived in the 20th century. He spoke in precise technical language, and never raised his voice or displayed emotion. Most unsettlingly, the voice did not sound distorted, mechanical, or artificial. It spoke clearly and sounded like a normal human male. Over dozens of calls, the caller asserted that humanity would destroy itself environmentally and future societies would rely on limited contact with the past, and timely communication was possible, but physical travel was not. Only certain individuals could be contacted due to unknown constraints. The caller insisted he was not a prankster and that this communication is difficult and costly. It will not continue indefinitely. And this is where the case moves from strange to deeply anomalous. Telephone company investigations revealed that the calls could not be traced, and they did not originate from another exchange, a private line, or a payphone. In some instances, no switching record existed at all. Now, this was highly unusual for 1970s analog phone systems, which were entirely hardwire-based. Local police were notified where calls were logged and monitored. No criminal activity could be identified, and no harassment laws were applicable due to the non-threatening nature. The police ultimately concluded that there was no identifiable source and no criminal intent. However, there were several deeply strange behavioural features that were consistent. The caller never phoned when visitors were present, and the calls abruptly ceased if Joseph Subrink tried to record them. The caller seemed aware of Subrink's emotional state, and conversations ended abruptly if Subrink asked personal questions. The caller made broad but unsettling statements about environmental collapse, political instability, overpopulation, and decline of civil infrastructure. While not specific predictions, the tone and framing were unusual for the mid-1970s, when such ideas were far less mainstream. Then in early 1975, the calls simply stopped with no explanation, no farewell, and no trace. Despite Subrink's attempts to reinitiate contact, nothing ever resumed. The case resists explanation because it does not fit being a hoax, as there was no traceable source, no motive, and no explanation. Dr. Subrink's mental health was not brought into question because he was a trained psychologist, where third-party witnesses confirmed calls. it could not have been a case of technological spoofing or cybercriminal activity, because it was beyond known 1970s capabilities. Researchers from the Society for Psychical Research also analysed the case using independent telecom engineers who reached the conclusion that the calls had occurred. The source was never identified and the mechanism remains unknown. The case was unsettling and frightening, not because of what was said, but because of how mundane delivery was, with no theatrics, hysteria, or supernatural trappings. Just a man calmly speaking from somewhere that should not have been able to call. On a final chilling note, Dr. Joseph Sudbring himself later said that what disturbed him most was not the content, but that the caller sounded like someone who was already resigned to failure. So what is disturbing is that the events may be real, but the strange part is that the communication seems to have no clear sender because the calls were heard and its voice was coherent. But no person may have been deliberately speaking. That lack of who is what makes them unsettling, not ghosts, not hoaxes, not mental illnesses, just communication without an author.